Each day we uncover another story, a tale of extraordinary heroism from the crucible of the Second World War. January 1945. The great war machine of the Third Reich is grinding to a halt, but in its death throes it thrashes with unimaginable violence. Deep in the ancient forests of northeastern France, in a region known as Alsace, one of Hitler's last desperate gambles is unfolding: Operation Nordwind. This sector will become infamous as the Colmar Pocket, a name that would be forever synonymous with ice, steel, and blood. Here, reality is a relentless assault on the senses. The temperature has not risen above freezing for weeks. A piercing, razor-sharp wind howls through the skeletal trees, turning the falling snow into a blinding flurry of ice crystals. The earth is frozen solid, as hard and unforgiving as concrete. For the American soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division, the simple act of digging a foxhole for cover is a Herculean task of chipping away at the ground for hours, only to create a shallow, frozen grave. This is a personal hell where the enemy is not just the man with a rifle, but the environment itself. Frostbite is rampant, turning fingers and toes black and useless. Pneumonia spreads like wildfire through the ranks. Trenchfoot, a grotesque affliction from the war's first generation, has returned to rot the flesh from the feet of its grandsons. But the greatest terror does not come from the cold. It comes from the white curtain of the blizzard. From it, like phantoms, emerge the elite of the German war machine. Veteran units, hardened on the Eastern Front, are thrown into the fray. Their iron fist is the Panther and Tiger tanks, mobile fortresses whose thick armor mocks the shells of American tank destroyers. Their infantry, clad in ghostly white winter camouflage, are nearly invisible against the snow, skilled hunters in their element. They advance in a furious, fanatical assault, a final, desperate attempt to throw the Allies back across the Rhine River and change the very course of the war. At the absolute spearhead of this German offensive is Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment. But it is a company in name only. Weeks of brutal combat, attritional warfare against the cold, and rampant disease have whittled its fighting strength from over 120 men down to a mere handful of 18 exhausted, half-frozen soldiers and 2 officers. Their communication lines to headquarters are a frayed thread, constantly breaking. Ammunition is critically low. Survival, not victory, is the primary concern. Retreat seems not just the sensible option, but the only sane one. But their new, temporary commanding officer thinks differently. He is only 19 years old. Standing just over 5'5" and weighing a scant 112 pounds, he looks like a boy who has tragically wandered onto the wrong stage. His face is youthful, almost childlike. His name is Audie Murphy. And what he is about to do in the next hour will not just be recorded in history, it will strain the very limits of belief. It will sound like a myth, a legend forged in the chaos of battle. But every element of it is the absolute, documented truth. This is the story of how a boy from the backwoods of Texas single-handedly stopped an army. To understand the impossible courage that was about to be unleashed in a frozen French forest, you have to travel thousands of miles and a lifetime away, to the dust-choked, sun-scorched plains of Texas during the Great Depression. Audie Leon Murphy was born in 1925 to a family of poor sharecroppers, the 7th of 12 children. Their life wasn't just humble, it was a daily, grinding, soul-crushing struggle for the barest of necessities. They lived in a derelict, abandoned railroad car, a crumbling shell of a home with no running water and no electricity. His father, broken by the relentless poverty, eventually abandoned them. Shortly after, his mother, a woman worn down by hardship and illness, passed away. At 16, Audie Murphy was an orphan, now the head of a family, responsible for his younger siblings. He was forced to drop out of school after only the 5th grade to work in the scorching cotton fields for $1 a day, his small frame straining under the relentless Texas sun. His only escape and the only reliable way to put meat on their meager table was hunting. With an old, single-shot rifle that belonged to his father, Audie would roam the woods and fields, hunting rabbits, squirrels, anything that could be turned into a meal. He became a phenomenal marksman, not out of sport, but out of necessity. He couldn't afford to miss. As he later recalled with grim simplicity, "If I missed, my family didn't eat." Every single bullet was the difference between a meal and starvation. This experience taught him more than just marksmanship. It taught him patience, observation, and the cold calculus of survival. When the news of Pearl Harbor shattered the nation's peace, 16-year-old Audie was fired up with a patriotic duty to serve. But his country, it seemed, did not want him. He tried to enlist in the Marine Corps, but the recruiter barely looked up, dismissing him with a laugh. The paratroopers told him he was too small. The Navy wouldn't even consider him. Too short, too skinny, too young. He was a boy in a world of men. But Audie Murphy was stubborn. He convinced his older sister to help him falsify his birth certificate, adding a year to his age. With that forged document, he tried the Army, who, desperate for bodies, reluctantly accepted him. At boot camp, his small stature made him an immediate target for ridicule. His fellow recruits, towering over him, called him "baby." His own sergeant, believing he was saving the boy's life, tried to have him transferred to cook and baker school. But Audie refused. He insisted on being an infantryman. No one looking at this quiet, unassuming young man, with his soft voice and humble demeanor, could have possibly imagined that he was destined to become the most decorated and revered soldier in the history of the United States military. Murphy's trial by fire began in 1943 under the blazing Sicilian sun. There, the jokes and the taunts stopped abruptly. In the crucible of his first combat, he proved that his worth wasn't measured in inches or pounds, but in sheer, unadulterated courage. Then came the brutal, grinding campaign on the Italian mainland, the bloody beaches of Salerno, the treacherous river crossings at the Volturno, the hellish stalemate at Anzio. In battle after battle, Murphy displayed an almost supernatural combination of ice-cold composure and a feral instinct for survival. He wasn't reckless, he was a hunter. He moved with a quiet purpose, using the terrain to his advantage, always thinking, always observing. He was wounded twice, struck down by a debilitating bout of malaria that left him weak and shivering, but each time he would escape from the field hospital and make his way back to his company. He couldn't leave his men. They were his only family now. By August of 1944, during the invasion of southern France, he was already a living legend within the 15th Infantry Regiment. In one now famous engagement, his best friend was killed by a German machine gun crew pretending to surrender. A cold fury overtook Murphy. He single-handedly charged the position, using a captured German machine gun to kill the crew, and then proceeded to wipe out several other nearby German positions. For this act, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. Promotions came quickly. He went from a private to a sergeant, and then, in a nearly unheard-of event, he was given a battlefield commission to second lieutenant and put in command of his own platoon. The men, many of whom were years older than him, followed him without question. They trusted him implicitly because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He was always at the front. His driving motive was a driving, vengeful rage for every friend he lost. "They were killing my friends," he would later explain, the words carrying the weight of all he had seen. That simple, powerful phrase was his personal code, and it was this code that brought him to the freezing forests of the Colmar Pocket, where he was about to face his greatest and most terrifying test. January 26, 1945, the village of Holtzwihr. The world was a canvas of white and gray. Around noon, a low, menacing rumble began to vibrate through the frozen ground. It grew into the terrifying roar of engines. Emerging from the snowy mist like prehistoric beasts were 6 German Panther tanks, their long cannons swiveling, scanning for targets. Flowing around them, almost invisible in their white camouflage, were 2 full companies of German infantry, around 250 men, advancing with grim determination. The 2 American M10 tank destroyers attached to Murphy's position opened fire, their cannons barking defiantly, but their shells were useless, striking the Panther's frontal armor and bouncing off with a metallic shriek. The German response was immediate and devastating. An 88mm shell fired from one of the Panthers tore through the air and slammed into one of the M10s. The American vehicle erupted into a monstrous ball of fire and black smoke, its crew incinerated instantly. The German infantry, using this chaos as cover, surged forward. A hailstorm of machine gun and rifle fire ripped through the American lines. The air was thick with the snap of bullets and the deafening crash of mortars. Murphy's men, exposed and outnumbered, began to fall. He knew with a chilling certainty that a few more minutes of this onslaught and his company would be completely annihilated. His field telephone was their last lifeline, their only connection to the artillery that could save them. He gave the order that must have felt like a death sentence to him. Fall back to the tree line. He would stay. He would cover their retreat. He would direct the fire. He remained alone at the edge of the clearing, a solitary figure against a backdrop of chaos, yelling coordinates into the phone. American artillery shells began to explode in the snow, tearing gaps in the advancing German lines. But it wasn't enough. The tanks were getting closer, their machine guns spitting fire. And then Audie Murphy did the unthinkable. His eyes fell upon the burning M10 tank destroyer. It was a funeral pyre, loaded with fuel and ammunition, a time bomb that could detonate at any second. But mounted on its open-top turret was a .50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun, one of the most powerful infantry weapons of the war. In a moment of pure, calculated desperation, he made his decision. He sprinted towards the burning vehicle, the heat so intense it felt like a physical blow. He scrambled onto the hull, the metal searing through his uniform, and climbed into the turret. Choking on the thick, acrid smoke, he swiveled the heavy machine gun towards the enemy and pressed the trigger. A deafening, hammering roar erupted from the .50 caliber. A stream of tracer rounds tore across the field and ripped into the German infantry line. For a moment, the attackers were stunned into confusion. Who was this madman? Then the full force of their attack, the machine guns of 6 tanks and hundreds of rifles, zeroed in on this single defiant figure on his burning throne. Bullets sparked and ricocheted off the armor around him. Shrapnel from mortar rounds whizzed past his head. A bullet tore into his leg, but in the firestorm of adrenaline and fury, he barely felt it. He was a machine, methodically sweeping the gun back and forth, cutting down the enemy infantry, preventing them from overwhelming his men's new position. All the while he clutched the telephone, continuing to call in artillery strikes. "The shells are landing too far out. Bring them in closer," he roared over the din. The incredulous officer on the other end asked how close the Germans were. "Just hold the line," he replied with chilling calm, "and I'll let you know when they're on top of me." He was directing the artillery to create a curtain of fire almost on his own position. This one-man stand lasted for nearly an hour. The official report would later estimate that he single-handedly killed or wounded at least 50 German soldiers. Finally, the heavy machine gun clicked empty, but it had been enough. The German infantry attack was broken. Without infantry support, the mighty Panther tanks hesitated, then began to slowly retreat back into the mist. Only then did Audie jump from the smoldering wreck. He landed hard, his wounded leg screaming in protest. Seconds later, the M10 finally exploded in a massive, earth-shaking fireball that sent a column of fire and debris high into the winter sky. Limping, his uniform smoking, his face blackened by soot, Audie Murphy made his way back to his men. He refused medical evacuation, refused to leave the field. Instead, he gathered the few who were left, and in a final, unbelievable act of leadership, he personally led them in a counterattack that drove the last of the enemy from the field for good. For this unparalleled act of bravery, which almost defies description, Audie Murphy was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for valor. He became an icon, a national hero, the living embodiment of the unbreakable American spirit. Life magazine put his boyish face on its cover. When the war in Europe finally ended, he was not yet 21 years old. He returned home as America's most decorated soldier of World War II, having received every combat award for valor his country could bestow. His fame became a ticket to a world he could never have imagined. Hollywood came calling. He starred in over 40 films, mostly westerns, where his quiet demeanor and authentic presence resonated with audiences. In 1955, he played himself in the film adaptation of his autobiography, To Hell and Back. The movie was a colossal success, becoming Universal Studios' highest-grossing picture for 2 decades. But behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood premieres and movie sets, a dark reality lingered. The war had never truly ended for Audie Murphy. He suffered from a severe case of what was then called battle fatigue, what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. He was tormented by horrific nightmares, forced to relive the war's most brutal moments, night after night. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, a habit from the front lines he could never break. He suffered from chronic insomnia and crippling bouts of depression. For a time, he became addicted to prescribed sleeping pills, fighting a lonely battle against his own mind. Unlike many of his generation who bore their scars in silence, Murphy refused to suffer quietly. He became one of the first and most prominent public figures in America to speak openly about the psychological wounds of war. He broke the taboo, demanding that the government acknowledge and treat the mental health of its returning veterans. He was still fighting for his men. Ironically, despite his Hollywood success, a series of bad investments and his own generosity left him struggling financially for much of his later life. The hero, to whom the nation owed an unpayable debt, faced the quiet desperation of looming bankruptcy. Audie Murphy's life was tragically cut short on May 28, 1971. The private plane he was a passenger in crashed into a mountainside in Virginia during bad weather. He was only 45 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, the final resting place of America's heroes. His headstone is simple and modest, identical to that of any other soldier. By his own request, none of the dozens of medals he earned are inscribed upon it. Despite this, his grave is one of the most visited in the entire cemetery, second only to that of President John F. Kennedy. The story of Audie Murphy is more than just a war story. It is an eternal and profound reminder of what the human spirit is capable of in the most unbearable of circumstances. It is a story about how the greatest heroes are not born in the mold of giants, but are ordinary people who, when faced with an extraordinary moment, find the strength within themselves to take one impossible step forward when everyone else is falling back. Behind the unassuming exterior of a poor Texas farm boy was a will of pure, unyielding steel. And his legacy lives on, a testament to the fact that one man, driven by courage and a fierce love for his comrades, could climb onto a burning tank and single-handedly hold back the tide of an entire army.